Two of the most common workbook events are the workbook open event and the workbook before close event. One being triggered when the workbook is first opened, obviously, and one being triggered just before you close the workbook. Obviously, it can't be triggered after you've closed the workbook because the workbook is gone. So it's called before close. So it's the last thing that will happen before the workbook closes is whatever code you've triggered. So if we take the open close event Excel workbook, we can use this to add in both an open and a close event. So we firstly need to go to our VBA editor. It's a workbook event, so we need to put it into this workbook object sheet, and we double click to open the sheet. So if we want to type the syntax ourselves, it's private sub workbook underscore open, and this particular event carries no parameters, so we can simply open and close brackets, return, and you can see the syntax gets sorted out for us. Private sub goes blue, end sub goes blue, title case, and workbook underscore open remains. Now, if all we want to simply do on open is to say welcome to our workbook, we can create a variable. So dim msg as string, msg equals welcome to guys workbook. And then we use the message box statement to output that message. So msg box, msg. To then see if this works, we need to close the VBA editor, save our workbook. So I'll save this with a different name, open close event, open trigger, save, close, and then let's open the file. So open close event, open trigger. We need to enable our macros because our security setting is such that we force ourselves to ask. And then we get welcome to guys workbook. Okay. Make sure it's in this workbook code sheet. It's the workbook underscore open. Now, we've seen previously that we don't need to know the exact syntax, even though we've given it here for each of the triggers. We simply go to the top left and choose workbook, to the top right and choose the trigger we're after. So we've already got an open one, so that's here. We need to choose a different one. Let's say, for example, sheet activate. And that will add in a new subroutine with the correct naming convention and any of the parameters that this particular trigger requires. So let's delete that. Nicely, the open one is the easiest. Straightforward workbook underscore open, no parameters. And then you can do exactly as you wish here. Open workbook events tend to be used, as we've done here, to give a little message, or to be used to open other workbooks that you may need open with linked data, for example, or for activating a particular worksheet in the workbook so you're always taken to the same worksheet every time it opens, and even for setting up custom menus. Now we're going to enhance ours slightly. At the moment it produces this message that said welcome to guys workbook. We're also going to get it if we have a look at the file. There's a log sheet, and over on the right hand side here in I1, I'd like to keep a log of how many times the file is opened. So I could use that open trigger to actually increment the value of this cell by 1. So in our Visual Basic, there's the workbook underscore open, there's our message box, and as well as producing the message, I'd like it to go to the sheets called log, the cell I1, and set its value equal to whatever the current value is. Let's take a copy of that, save typing, +1. So every time the workbook opens, as well as saying hi and welcome, it increments the log count. So if we close the editor, save the file and close the file, reopen the file, welcome to guys workbook, you can see the log count goes up to 1. We then close the file again, reopen the file, welcome, the log count goes to 2. So we're keeping a bit of history there of every time the workbook opens. What you'll also notice on this log file is over on the left here, we've created two columns, date and time open, date and time closed. So what we could do is get our little open event to actually put in the date and time the file was opened. So how are we going to get it? Put today's date, time in every time we open the file. Well, we simply add some more code into our little open trigger. So we go back into the Visual Basic. Here where we're incrementing the count by 1, we could tell it that on that same sheet, so the log sheet, so sheets, log dot range A2 dot value is going to be equal to now, which we've seen previously is the function for the date and time currently. Now that will work. Every time we open the file, it will put into A2 in the log sheet today's date and time. However, if we have a look at the page, that means this cell here will get today's date and time when you open the file. But that's not retaining any history. What we really need to do is effectively move the things down that are already there and then put that in. If we were to insert a row here first, that would move down any date and times we already had in the system, leaving this cell empty for us to then insert today's date and time. So in our little event, before we do that insertion of now, we're going to tell it to insert a row. So we can use the rows object, reference in row 2, dot, and there's a little method called insert. So we're going to insert a row at row 2, which effectively moves everything from row 2 downwards. Then into A2, we're going to place the value of now. Let's go back to the Excel, save, close, and open the file. We get our welcome. Increment goes up by 3, and we get today's date and time placed in A2. If we then save and close, reopen the file, we get our welcome. The increment goes up to 4, and over here, although we've done it a little quickly because we've got the same time, but we can see it's moved down the previous time and inserted the date and time now. Do it again to prove it's not a fluke. Welcome. Increment goes to 5, and we're inserting another row. Now if you look in the bar, you can see that that's 2246, that's 2227, that's 2212 seconds. So we are moving forward in time, and by that row insertion there in the code, we're keeping a history of every time the file is open. So that's an additional command here, insert a new row at row 2, which moves everything down, and then into cell A2, we put today's date and time. What you use the open event trigger for is entirely down to yourself, but you can see that there are plenty of uses for it.